By now, almost everyone who loves movies has completed their long-anticipated Barbenheimer double feature, forming their opinions on both in the process. The now-connected duology is helmed by Greta Gerwig and Christopher Nolan respectively. Nolan has possibly the most vocal and biggest fan base behind a director today, and is one of the few names who controls their entire creative process on the largest of scales. At the time of writing this, Barbie has just surpassed Dark Knight to become the highest-grossing domestic film in Warner Bros. History, proving that the post-pandemic era is still ripe for the taking. Art is dynamic, constantly fluctuating from one medium to the next, but one thing is certain: creativity is not and will never be in short supply. I'll be giving my thoughts on both films in this video and briefly talking about their positive impact on the industry as a whole. Gerwig's first two features are universally celebrated among audiences, with Little Woman being considered the best adaptation of Alcott's classic, a take which I agree with, and Lady Bird serving as a main staple in the A24 filmography. She's on track to place her name among the great female filmmakers like Chantal Akerman, Agnes Varda, and Jane Campion, all of whom are now considered generational talents. I'm glad that more women in cinema have recently been on a meteoric rise, and I have faith that we're going on the right track. Gerwig's approach to Barbie presents itself to be a universal one, transcending stereotypes of any kind. The meta approach to the narrative works in its favor. Not everyone will view the choices being made with the same purpose in mind, however. Since the film is ambiguous in its presentation of social themes, not in the structuring of the narrative, it opens itself up to a myriad of debatable choices. The plot of Barbie on paper is rather simple, taking a spin on the fish out of water story. Much of the film's success for me comes from its unabashed sense of identity. Self-reflexive in its understanding of both sides of how it could be possibly viewed, it retains much of its innocence, mostly through its jokiness, as expected, while also straying into rather complex issues, more of which I'll discuss later in this video. If you take the thematic material out of the picture, it's a fantastic comedy filled with ingenuity. Margot Robbie delivers another exceptional performance, and Ryan Gosling continues his reign as one of the best working actors today. The production design is lavish and rich, preserving the dichotomy between the real world and a child's inner mind. While the set design and locations could have played a smaller role under another filmmaker or crew, the audience is thrust into a blend of familiarity through the inevitable awkwardness of childhood. Sanjay Leela Bhansali's 2002 film Devdas is among the finest examples of using production design not to merely construct a setting, but to capture the distinct emotion between characters and their environment. Like Barbie, Devdas is packed with tonal shifts and onslaughts of emotion. Being a Bollywood film, there are many masterful musical numbers filled with unmatched synchronicity. I'm Just Ken proves how magical cinema can be when it isn't taken so seriously, reminding me of the euphoric experience of knowing that a musical number has the potential to break out of nowhere. The film's ability to emotionally engage the viewer, all while maintaining a sense of playfulness, is what makes the experience so special in particular, as this can resonate with anyone regardless of their identity. Moments like this are spread throughout the runtime, especially within the comedic timing, which is absolutely splendid. The serious scenes mesh perfectly with their counterparts. Barbie never takes itself too seriously, and by doing so, prioritizes itself in being a roller coaster of extravagance. The soundtrack, when listened to without the accompaniment of the film, certainly isn't as effective. Billie Eilish and Dua Lipa's tracks in particular capture its essence with grace, serving as a great guide to the constantly shifting array of moods. The Jacques Demy and Jacques Tati influence is clear throughout the costume design and composition. Heartfelt in both a melodramatic and cheerful way, it's plain to see just how valuable inspiration is in this instance. The Umbrellas of Cherbourg comes to mind when referencing the color palette and makeup. I'd have picked Catherine Deneuve to star in the film if it came out in the 1970s. Technically adept in every department behind the camera, the excellent characterization meshes with the dynamic setting, ending in an engrossing visual delight. With this success in mind, expectations and doubts are subverted through the balancing of traditional plot points and a wonderfully paced narrative. The world building is strong enough to establish an immediate hold on the audience, never overstaying its welcome. Gerwig's ability to find the highest of emotions through the smallest of moments works well in every fashion, from the quirky jokes to the joyous atmosphere. Since so much of the film's emphasis is placed on how the protagonists react to their environments, I do wish that Barbie and Ken were able to interact with the real world for a longer period, since I feel that Gloria and Sasha could have been integrated into the story with a bit more grace if the runtime were longer. A larger insight into the effects of Barbie dolls in childhood also could have been explored further, but all those are minor issues. Interestingly enough, the controversy that I thought would have been attributed to Oppenheimer instead formed itself around Barbie. I find it ironic that many people who would be in favor of keeping politics outside of things like sports and entertainment chose to politicize a movie around dolls designed for children. I don't see it being as simple as men bad, women good, but more of a reflection of our modern world filtered through the lens of a doll that came to life with no prior knowledge of anything. This form of satire succeeds by fantasizing and hyper-exaggerating real-world problems. Just as a young child would play with Barbie dolls, creating endless scenarios with their imagination, it's only natural for their worldview to be based on certainties rather than shades of gray. Emotions come and go easily, much like how a doll has the same expression when it is purchased. The small details in world building are what elevate the story into a whimsical journey of existentialism and the roles that gender play in society. While this social commentary certainly plays a heavy role in the film, I never once felt that its creative integrity came close to being jeopardized for the sake of pushing a so-called agenda. There's a clear distinction made in the film that both the patriarchy and matriarchy can be toxic, and each side is portrayed in its most extreme form, simultaneously capturing the sentiment of how the modern patriarchy damages the well-being of women while shining a light on the importance of male self-confidence as well. Barbie is now the blueprint behind an IP-driven movie and will hopefully convince the industry that it isn't simply successful because the brand's name is in the title. It's doing so well because it's a wondrous, unique, and imaginative film filled to the brim with heart. Final note, being a big fan of Rob Brydon, I can't gloss over how pleasantly surprised I was to see his brief cameo. Fans of the trip will also agree with me. Christopher Nolan draws an audience to his work perhaps better than anyone else working today. Even if you aren't an avid filmgoer, you'll be intrigued by the spectacle on display, ready to surrender yourself to the inevitable barrage your senses are about to endure. He gets those who watch his films to talk, an important part of what makes cinema so special. Oppenheimer is certainly no exception to this, surrounding itself with a person larger than life and a topic that will continue to impact us all. Based on a biography written by authors Kai Bird, a Pulitzer Prize winner, and Martin J. Sherwin, American Prometheus, The Triumph and Tragedy of J. Robert Oppenheimer, served as the basis for the 3-hour biopic. I read the book in preparation for the film. It's a work filled to the brim with fascinating detail, offering insight into our modern world and past based on science and politics, depicting their crash course fueled by a society wrought with paranoia. Adapting work this grand in scale is difficult to say the least, even without the help of a spectacular biography. In truth, Hollywood already took the opportunity to tell part of Oppenheimer's story once before. In 1989, director Roland Joffe's Fat Man and Little Boy was released, starring the great Paul Newman, Dwight Schultz, Bonnie Bedelia, John Cusack, and Laura Dern. The chance to showcase a story of moral strife and scientific brilliance seemed like a surefire recipe for success. The film fell prey to one of Hollywood's unfortunate mainstays, dramatization for the sake of entertainment. Doing this is certainly alright in some cases, and many of the film's key events are true on paper, although in this case, the already complex subject matter is condensed into a relatively short runtime, with the emphasis being placed on Newman's portrayal of General Leslie Groves. Cusack's character works as an amalgamation of a group of people helping on the Manhattan Project, with scientist Louis Slotin at the forefront. Unnecessary alterations are made to both this character and those he interacts with to force conflict. Some other critics of the film comment on the miscasting of both main leads, but I see this as more of a script issue than an acting one. Newman's charisma is still on display as expected, but there isn't any character who can reciprocate the same sentiment. Oppenheimer's portrayal is overtly boyish and fails to highlight the philosophical intricacies of his work and life. It's such a generalized account of what otherwise would amount to a vastly rich historical retelling. How can this problem be remedied? One-of-a-kind actors and the premise of the Manhattan Project itself weren't the only aspects needed to carry a story of this stature. Drastic changes were needed, and that's where Christopher Nolan comes in. Joffe understood how paramount General Groves' inclusion was in Fat Man and Little Boy, going so far as to make him the main protagonist. Newman's rendition felt too isolated from his peers though. Oppenheimer couldn't be reduced to exposition in his own story. Nolan's ability to translate the simplest of moments and interactions into a kaleidoscope of shifting emotions is on full display here, as he elects to make Matt Damon's rendition of General Groves still carry the same sense of importance in the script. Cillian Murphy is spectacular as expected. His lifelike channeling of a man with the weight of the world on his shoulders is nothing short of brilliant. General Groves' relationship with Oppenheimer is the most fascinating to me in the film, since in another life, they would have had every reason to be the fiercest of rivals. Instead, their undeclared bond built on mutual reverence somehow transcends all of the personal, political, and governmental boundaries placed between them. The rest of the supporting cast holds their own too, crafting a memorable ensemble without flaw, all who serve an allotted chapter in Oppenheimer's life. Robert Downey Jr.'s performance as Louis Strauss presents a complex and gritty approach to a person faced with two solutions, both of which seemingly lead to inevitable conflict, much like Oppenheimer's scientific endeavors. Oppenheimer's remaining relationships, friend or foe, are vastly disparate and filled with unpredictability. The result of both an overwhelmingly stressful personal and work life culminates into a rather subtle look into a man who is systematically broken down, reduced to a mere building block in the chronicle of history. Ludwig Göransson's score almost feels like a second script, weaving its sonic presence between passages of speech, building tension at every turn. The structuring of the compositions themselves mirrors Nolan's sentiment toward the film and its style. A majority of his most critically and commercially successful works center themselves around the grandest of occurrences or people: Batman, the spectacle of magic, or the horror of warfare. Oppenheimer still somehow feels more epic than all of these, asserting and subverting itself in the face of the audience's perception of what this particular spectacle should consist of. Göransson opts to take a minimalist approach to his score, with sounds reminiscent of artists like Philip Glass, Steve Reich, and Terry Riley, who all share a common component in their style: rhythm through repetition. Phasing, shifting, and sporadic drones are used with a consequence, culminating in a simple yet profound blend of sound. Engaging at every turn, it's fantastic how tense each moment seems, particularly since we already know what happens in the supposed climax. The overwhelming sense of urgency is palpable, and the sequencing of events is laid out with earnestness. Despite having so much to do with the subject of physics and mathematics, the film stays true to the source material by practically omitting any inclusion of the subjects whatsoever. This works perfectly since the prominence of the plot is placed on the politics and psychological impact his work presents on a mass scale. The visions of light and matter are dispersed throughout scenes and effectively complete their goal in both building an atmosphere and transitioning the story forward. Because we're constantly being engaged through stimuli, the explosion itself acts as a catharsis for the pent-up tension. I found it brilliant that the stomping, initially played in the trailer, and the harrowing scene was actually more loud than the detonation of the bomb. In this sequence, Nolan somehow conjures the intensity from one of the places where science takes a back seat, the deepest thoughts of the human mind. The horror through Oppenheimer's perception only reveals itself to be true after the completion of the device. Its effects being obvious still cannot mask its horror. The final act of the movie seems to be heavily inspired by Oliver Stone's JFK. From its frenetic pace to its revelatory nature, each line feels monumental. Oppenheimer shouldn't be considered a slow film in any sense of the word. Once a thought enters your head, it is immediately replaced with another. This relentlessness amounts to a gut-wrenching finale. One questions just how much power humans should truly possess. My only major issue with the film is the lack of screen time for both the main female characters, Kitty Oppenheimer and Jean Tatlock. Contrary to the rest of the characters and depicted events, the inclusion of both women doesn't carry enough consequence. Emily Blunt and Florence Pugh are unfortunately underutilized as a result. If their scenes were to be removed and replaced with something else entirely, I don't think it would have heavily impacted Nolan's specific framing of the story. Bird and Sherwin make it quite clear that the pair were even more integral to Oppenheimer's life than shown on screen, and in my opinion, it is a missed opportunity that would have added yet another layer of depth to the narrative. A common criticism directed at Nolan revolves around his lack of characterization when developing female characters, but this statement doesn't feel as applicable in this circumstance due to their lack of overall importance in the 3 hours. I also feel that Haakon Chevalier's inclusion could have played more of a significant role as well, considering his heavy involvement in the biography. His conversation with Oppenheimer towards the beginning of the film is brief but vital, which I felt really needed to be expanded upon. Nolan understands that sparking discussion continues to give film life, something that coincides with the creative choices he elects to tell us. The objective black and white versus the subjective color scenes, combined with the script being written in the first person, may not be what you think is necessary, but you most definitely have an opinion on it. Oppenheimer's capacity to inspire constructive discourse enriches the quality overall, and the thoughts that ruminate in your mind will be as exciting as the film itself. In reality, the entire film could have revolved around the day of the Trinity test, so it makes sense to focus on what was portrayed. Since the amount of information within Oppenheimer's story is simply astounding, I think what was chosen worked perfectly in hindsight. Similarly to Gerwig with Barbie, Nolan has the world at his feet here, and the decision is his when choosing to highlight what he believes is paramount. It's safe to say that he succeeded in bringing his specific vision to the screen, resulting in what I think is the best technical achievement of his career. I commend his unwavering commitment to his craft and will continue to always support whatever he chooses to do next. Hollywood blockbusters often market themselves as primarily being a form of escapism, the opposite of what a member of the French New Wave would say the aim of cinema should be. When Avengers Endgame ends, we are upset that we have to return to real life, but when something like Day for Night ends, we are excited to return to reality. Nolan's achievement in fulfilling the latter without ever overtly aiming to do so, in the eyes of an increasingly profit-driven industry, is even more impressive to me than him making another great film. He strikes a balance between the two, deceiving those who doubt that a story rooted in science and politics, two innately human constructs, can be more entertaining than anything else. The rise of the digital age and its consequences have already set in with the introduction of streaming services, a change that many have felt set a new trend in motion. Quality of the experience will be sacrificed for comfort. The fears of many seem to have already come true. Many filmmakers have already made their statement from the artist's perspective, a notable one being the Thai legend Apichatpong Veerasethakul's 2010 Palme d'Or winner, Uncle Boonmee Who Can Recall His Past Lives. Depending on who you ask, it's an auteur working at the height of its powers, or it's too slow and needlessly complex. While, of course, I side with the first statement, there's something both sides can agree upon. It's unequivocally his film, indistinguishable from anything else ever made. The same can be said for Nolan and Gerwig's body of work. I think filmmakers from older generations would have been appreciative of their perseverance on a mainstream scale to keep the art in the art form first. Involving moviegoers on a wide scale has never held as much importance as it has now. The Barbenheimer trend and internet discourse spread like wildfire on social media, eventually unintentionally boosting the marketing for both in the process. We have two very different filmmakers, two very different films, with vastly disparate tones, yet our passion for each remains the same. This level of support sends a powerful message to those at the forefront of the industry, reminding them of one thing: this power belongs to the people. If original dramas lead the box office, they will be made on a mass scale. If creative, IP-based satires lead the box office, they will follow suit. As of now, financial feedback is the only facet that determines how our interests appear, ultimately dictating what gets made on this mainstream level. The summer of 2023 will certainly go down as a memorable period and vital for shaping the film industry's near future. Superhero content seems to be on the decline in overall quality, with a few recent successes all belonging to those familiar with the medium. The rise of artificial intelligence poses a new threat to artists as a whole. I'm sure Veerasetthakul would be happy to know that his limitation surrounding the fading trend of shooting on film in Uncle Boonmee hasn't fully taken root. As long as popular filmmakers like Nolan, Tarantino, and Scorsese continue to unite, I have faith that no form of cinema can truly die. I'll leave you with a brief anecdote surrounding the unique late Michael Snow, whose work will feature prominently in a future video. If you need an idea of what he's like, here's his sight and sound ballot for the most recent edition. People often bestow the honor of calling the films of those like Nolan experiences, a label that certainly wouldn't be wrong if applied to Snow. His structureless approach to filmmaking may come off as pretentious to some, but I prefer to view it through the very same lens he creates them. If I told you a robot was capable of making a film, what would you say? It's not human, therefore it cannot be art? The same is said when directing criticism towards self-proclaimed AI artists, but there's a difference between technology controlling art and vice versa. But a robot can create art. Snow's 1971 work, La Region Centrale, is the example I use to reassure anyone fearful of the dangers of AI in cinema. The film is made entirely through the application of a robotic arm, controlled only by pre-programmed movements. It's artistic innovation at its finest, but it wouldn't be possible without the use of technology, honed by a human mind. I'd like to believe that Snow would have had much to say regarding the state of film moving forward, and that AI can be used not to write scripts or mimic actors of the past, but to truly be utilized by a pure artist in every sense of the word. Nolan, Gerwig, anyone, maybe even you. When a mainstream original Hollywood film seems to be in short supply, there will always be a Christopher Nolan. When IP-based stories seem boring, Greta Gerwig breathes life into them again. Human innovation in cinema is exactly why new becomes normal and how the normal can become new again. This cycle will continue to repeat. As always, have faith in yourself and your fellow creatives and support what you want to be seen. Thank you for watching, I truly appreciate it. If you want to hear more of my thoughts on cinema, please consider subscribing to the channel and checking out my socials. I can't wait to learn more from you all.